Hey, what is going on, everybody? In this video, we are going to be taking a look at the genre of trip hop, producing a track from scratch in Ableton Live 11 Suite. We'll talk about various techniques in the video like tap tempo, freeze and flatten, automating the glides in your bass lines, and in general just how to arrange a track from a loop idea. If you're new to the channel, check the link in the description to my personal Gumroad library of free stuff to download. And now, let's get into the video. I actually like to start oftentimes with harsh sounds because I find you can do certain mixing techniques to them to make them less harsh and brittle sounding. Once you EQ something, you can then add chorus and phaser to it to make it like a really interesting sound. I kind of want to make this one super weird though, so maybe even add like another flanger to it. Now this is Arturia's plugin that I'm using here for adding some of that lo-fi texture to the synth, which is also very useful for harsher sounds, and it's also used in trip hop to have that grungier aesthetic as well. If I find a riff while I'm just messing around, I'm going to use tap tempo to actually set it. So thinking of the riff that I had in mind, something like that. So let's say 113. I tend to just set it to an even number. I don't use the decimals. It's probably a more general tip, but using tap tempo in Ableton Live in particular is really useful because you want to get the right tempo for the riff that you're writing. If you put in your MIDI notes later and you have to then fix everything after the fact, it's really a pain to do. So get it right in the beginning, figure out the BPM right away. And then once I have that, I'm going to start adding in other parallel effects, more processing. I get that all set up the way I want it to be, so I can essentially then render the sound into, it's like making your own loop, right? So then you render it out of that, so you're not using up all that processing power. So I just I freeze and flatten right away, or I freeze it, and then this still allows me to edit the clip. So it's going to freeze, render the effects into it. The track is going to turn blue, but I can still just go right ahead and, you know, take this and duplicate it so we can make a loop out of it, that sort of thing. There's literally nothing wrong with that at all. So when I feel ready to, I can then go ahead and flatten this into audio. But now you can see my processing has gone way down. So it's sort of like a way of locking in the sound. And I feel like from a psychological perspective, that's a good idea because it's very easy when you have a bunch of plugins to never really decide on what the sound of your song or idea is going to be. So mixes take forever, songs take forever, your productions take forever because you're always, you could get, it's dangerous. You get locked into fiddling with stuff. And you don't want to get stun locked with your sounds, you know. You want to go ahead and figure out what sounds cool and then just move forward. Now, I've been teaching privately music production lessons for about 2 years now, really ever since the start of the pandemic. And what I found is a lot of students, really of all ages, have not really heard of the genre trip hop. So I actually wanted to make this video. I wanted to just make a track in general, but I was a little bit inspired by that notion that most people that I've talked to anyway don't know what trip hop is. But you can see here I'm taking samples from my pack Lo-Fi Meditations, which is a hip hop sample pack primarily, you know, generally speaking. It's putting the genre of hip hop into a variety of other genres and styles. So it's not strictly speaking hip hop, but influenced by it. And I typically find this is the case in sort of the samples that we use, the beats that we produce, have that sort of old school hip hop aesthetic with a variety of other creative forms of instrumentation. So you can have orchestral samples, you can have synthesizers, guitars, you can bring in elements of rock music into it. So trip hop is very much so a bit of an umbrella term. And here you can use me using a synthesizer too. What I like about this video is I get to talk about some of my favorite tools right now. This is Anna 2 by Slate Digital. I believe it's Sonic Academy that actually developed the synth in coordination with Slate Digital. But it comes with their all access pass, which has been amazing for me in my mixing and music production. So lots of great presets and sounds on there for you to jump right into. I'm basically using that with an arpeggiator MIDI function, that MIDI module you see there in the bottom left, that Ableton is so great at compartmentalizing these certain kind of MIDI modules and then throwing on some reverb and editing everything to kind of come together. And this is also a good example of when you're using a Reese bass or an 808 style bass, trying to use glide features, especially as an Ableton user. And I get a lot of questions about this. Here you can see I'm laying down a bass line, and as I get into my MIDI, I'm going to want to add in basically an octave to that bass part. And a lot of people ask, how do you get that sort of gliding effect that happens a lot of hip-hop tracks where the 808 is sort of gliding up and down, and you can have these very interesting sort of sliding motions in the 808. And the answer I'm going to get into here in a second has to do primarily with using automation lanes, believe it or not, because you don't always have to use a sample to make an 808 in your track. You can also just use a synthesizer. It'll give you a slightly different sound, but it will also give you more capabilities and more sound design possibilities because of the nature of what it is. The benefit of using Wavetable is like any other Ableton module or plugin on the screen. You can use the automation window to automate virtually anything, including the glide timing. So if I decide I want to have a glide that's slower, I can do that. So here I'm setting it to like, I think the original was like 190, which is like kind of faster in terms of glide. It's more moderate fast, but like here I jump up an octave in the bass line. So what I would actually want to do, I'm going to switch to slip mode as well, so I can actually take this and like make the effect of it basically like a much longer effect. So this way I can say, okay, you know what? I would much rather it be a longer period of time, like maybe let's say almost 1 second. So there, it's now there. So as you run through it, and this is probably the reason why I have videos on my channel about Wavetable. So if you're an Ableton user and you're interested in making full use of Wavetable, definitely check out previous video tutorials on making 808s with Wavetable. I also have free packs with prepared presets that you can download totally for free, throw them in your session, make use of them, and also study them to make these sounds yourself. It's a great synthesizer to use, and the glide feature is oftentimes something people don't use. Here I'm just adding more instruments, more overdubs, some guitars specifically, and you can see I might use a lot of plugins. Again, once I get what I want out of the sound design, I freeze and flatten and commit that sound into my loop. And probably the final thing that's worth talking about in this video is a lot of people land up in the same spot, right? They have basically a 4, 8, 16 bar loop of 4 to 7 elements that are all working really well together. And they kind of get stuck there. I mean, I know producers, I'm one of them myself, that at a certain point just had piles and piles of sessions stacked up in my hard drive that were just basically loops that never became anything more than that. And it can become kind of almost like a mental block to a lot of producers. So this section of the video is really just covering what you want to look out for if that's your style of workflow. And there's nothing wrong with making loops when you're coming up with your ideas. The point is how to get out of them. And you see I pushed all the loops, the loop itself, to the right so that I had all this space back in the beginning of the song. That's a bit of a mental trick. Because what I then think about is what is the one element of my loop that I've created, the one instrumental element, the one instrument that I want to hear first to sort of tell the story of the song. And even if it's just one loop of 4 or 5 instruments that you've made, you can create an arrangement from that. You might decide later on that you might want to add transitions and other overdubs to fill it out, or add in a B section or a bridge section, but this is a great way to break yourself out of that block, which is a very real block that a lot of producers suffer from. And I've done countless lessons where I've walked people through this process of taking your loop and figuring out how to reverse engineer it essentially into an arrangement for a song. And you can do it. You can do it even if you just have a basic loop together of 4 or 5 elements. And what you see me doing here is building that intro to verse to chorus payoff going into a second verse and then a second chorus. So you can get that far. Now, of course, again, later on you might want to add more instruments or add more transition effects or whatever you can think of to add more variety and detail to the song production as a whole. That's totally relevant, but what you see right here is me getting to that second chorus. Now, whether you can make a bridge from a loop or not is another kind of topic altogether, right? Because there's different creative ways to do it. It's creative problem solving, essentially what arranging is, but it's such a common thing to find students. I'm one of those people myself that comes up with an inspiring idea that's simply just 4 bars or 8 bars. And it's hard for you to think past that. Or if you try to think of a chorus, like a part B to what you've created, nothing really feels like it matches. You feel like you're Frankensteining things. This is how you can get out of that and start to really make a song become a song and not just a loop that's going to sort of die on the vine sitting in your hard drive for years. So if this is something that you've been thinking about, I highly, highly recommend you start to do this technique. Take the loop, and just by pushing things to the right, you free up all that space on the left-hand side to develop into the loop. Granted, it might turn the loop more into a chorus in that song structure idea, but it doesn't have to be that way either. It just gets you started developing the idea as a song. If you found this video useful to you at all, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more music production videos. Good luck with your own music. I'll see you around. Take care.